See, on the layer of virtualization, if you want to install new operating systems and new applications by virtualizing the same hardware and existing resources, then we need some architecture. We call it as virtual machine architecture. An example for that is VMware, then Oracle virtual machines we have. So those are the examples for virtual machine based architectures. Then applications and system are implemented on top of this layer and become portable for different hardware and software environments. That means it is portable so that by using the same hardware, underlying whatever the hardware and software environment that you have, you can install new applications using the same hardware and software environment. And the general interaction flow for systems implementing this pattern is the program defines its operations and state in an abstract format, which is interpreted by a virtual machine engine. The interpretation of a program constitutes its execution, and it is quite common in this scenario that the engine maintains the internal representation of the program state. Students, here we need to understand how the virtual machine will protect the state of the internal representation of the program. Say for example, you have Windows operating system, in that you have installed virtual machine or VMware virtual machine, and you have installed Linux. So when you want to quit Linux, what you will do usually, if you quit, what happens? It will shut down. It will ask you whether you want to shut down or you want to suspend. If you suspend, what happens? And if you shut down, what happens? What is the difference? Arjun?
Sir?
What is the difference between suspending an virtual machine and shutting down the virtual machine?
Sir, completely we are closing the shutdown means completely we are closing means
it will not protect the state of the system, isn't
data
it?
will be lost.
OS.
Suspend means we are forcefully suspending that, sir.
Yeah. So if you suspend, it will not ask you, when you open it again, it will not ask you to boot it, isn't it?
Yes,
it is ready, the OS is ready for use. So that will be the state. That means in what state you are suspending, the same state will be preserved by the virtual machine. So that is one of the striking features of virtual machine based architectures. See, usually whenever we deal with any full-fledged operating system, what happens? The moment when we switch on the system, when it is dual boot system, it will say, for example, you have 3 operating systems, one Windows XP and one Windows 10 and another one Fedora, say Fedora version 16. It will ask you to which OS you want to log in. It will ask you during boot time. There you will select which OS you want. Then it will start booting. That means there is no facility wherein you can store the state of the machine. It will start entirely from booting. It will start from the scratch. Whereas if you go with virtual machine based architectures, like if you have one base operating system like Windows, upon that you will be installing the virtual machine. Upon that you will be installing one more operating system. Upon you suspending from that operating system, when you reopen it again, it will be preserving the state. Say for example, before suspending, let us assume you had opened one command prompt and one editor, and you are suspending. When you log in into that same OS once again, it will preserve the state. That means you can see that whatever you had opened earlier, that command prompt and editor, it will be like that only. That is called preserving the state of the machine or the system. This is one of the striking features of virtual machine based architectures. And another the important benefit is that you can have seamless transition between Windows and Linux, where you have installed Linux on virtual machine and Windows is the base operating system, isn't it? So that is the biggest advantage. If you compare with that with full-fledged operating system, say for example, if you have 2 full-fledged operating systems, Windows and Linux, how you can shift from Windows to Linux? First you give shutdown for Windows, then you boot it, During boot time, you select that I want to go to Linux. Then you can enter into Linux. So that is tedious process, time consuming tedious process. That to overcome that, we can use virtual machine based architectures. That means we can install virtual machines, then we can install whatever the application that we want. That is the advantage. And another advantage is that it will use the same hardware what you have used to install Windows, and to run the new applications also it will use the same resources, but it will virtualize them. The task of this virtual machine is to virtualize the resources. It will virtualize the data bus, instruction bus, everything. It will virtualize the processor, it will virtualize the memory, whatever the resources you have, that will be virtualized. Popular examples within this category are rule-based systems, interpreters, and command language processors. First, we'll see what is the meaning of rule-based systems. See, this architecture is characterized by representing the abstract execution environment as an interface engine. Programs are expressed in the form of rules and predicates that hold true. That means if you have a program, the instructions of the program will be considered as either the rules or predicates, which if it that holds true. The input data for applications is generally represented by a set of assertions and facts that the interface engine uses to activate rules or apply predicates, thus transforming data. That means before transforming the data, it will check what is the state of the, or what is the outcome of the program, whether it is true or false. If it is true, transform the data. If it is false, don't transform the data. So one very good example for that is network-based intrusion detection system. Network-based intrusion detection system is one which is used to it is used as a filter. Which will detect presence of any threats. If any threat is coming to the system, it will detect and it will give you an alert, or sometimes even it may also take some action. Say for example, you are interested in maintaining the what is that safety status of your machine. Say for example, if the safety status is green, that means it is safe. That means then the condition is true, otherwise the condition is false. Similarly, say for example, when you are dealing with scanning the system, when you scan the system, if there are any threats, it will detect, isn't it? So that's a rule-based mechanism. So if that threat is detected, change the status to true, or else make it false. So like that, when you consider any rule-based system, the program is expressed in the form of rules or predicates. So in predicate logic, there are only two possible values, that is true and false. And when you consider any rule, either we say that the rule is true or false. Then is interpreter style. Students, can you give examples for interpreter styles? Hello? Hello students, can you give one example for interpreter style? See, the definition is the presence of engine to interpret the style. The presence of engine. Say for example, you are dealing with web pages and you take any browser. So some browsers will be supporting for JavaScript, and some will be supporting for VBScript, isn't it? Say for example, I have a browser and that is supporting for JavaScript. That means internally that browser will be having JavaScript, something called as JavaScript engine. It will, when the web page is displayed, you will understand that web page in terms of JavaScript, and to process that JavaScript instructions, so we need an engine and we call it as JavaScript engine. That is an example for interpreter style of architectures. And another example for interpreter, so we have shell. So that is different thing, that is command line interpreter, but that is also an interpreter. And we have a Python, which is also an interpreter. What the interpreter will do, it will interpret one line at a time, isn't it? When you have a series of instructions, it will interpret one instruction at a time. Whereas if we consider the example of compiler, it can scan all the instructions at once, and that means it will scan all the instructions at once, whereas the interpreter, it will deal one instruction at a time. An example for interpreter style is JavaScript engine, which is part of our browser. When you have, say for example, you have written one HTML file which contains some JavaScript also. So how to process, say you have developed one interactive web page by using JavaScript. So now the role of JavaScript engine is very much essential to take corrective action, isn't it? That's the role of interpreter. Then another variant of virtual machine based architecture is call and return architectures. Call and return architecture, that is one more variant of virtual machine based architecture. And a very good example for that one is our C programming. Or C programming, it follows call and return architecture. That means which follows top down style. And another example, object oriented style and layered style. Look at the basic definition of call and return architectures. This identifies all the systems that are organized into components mostly connected together by method calls. That means whenever you have a software component, and the components inside the system are connected and communicated through method calls, that means function calls. That can be an example for call and return architecture. Why it got its name call and return? That means one method is calling another method. That means it is calling another method to seek some help. So upon finishing the execution of that method, it has to return control back to the calling method. So hence it got its name call and return architecture. The activity of systems modeled in this way is characterized by a chain of method calls whose overall execution and composition identify the execution of one or more operations. That means here the whole system is characterized by linking the method calls, and whose overall purpose is to support for exchanging the messages through methods and executing the operations. Say for example, when you write methods, so what is the purpose of writing the method? Usually we say that one method will do one meaningful task. To implement some functionality, we write methods. There are three categories in this. One is top-down style. Example for this top-down style is C programming. It's an language, structured programming language, which follows top-down style. That means first you have a main method, which in turn call the user-defined method, like that. So upon finishing the execution of user-defined method, it has to return control back to the main method. So that can be one of the example for top-down style. Then object-oriented style. You can take the example of any object-oriented programming. It can be Python, it can be C++, Java, .NET, anything, where it follows bottom-up approach. Say here, whether it can be top-down or bottom-up, what is important is it is relying on call and return model, that is function calls. It is relying on function calls. And another model is layered style. Example for layered style is ISO OSI model. Actually, what is that ISO OSI model? That's an reference model which will give you the specification about how the communication between different systems will occur, and that functionalities will be divided into layers like application layer, presentation layer, and so on. And when you consider any layer style, the bottom layer will provide functionalities to its next immediate upper layer. Provides the implementation in different levels of abstraction of the system. Then once again here, to implement the functionality, we write functions. So that means call and return model. It depends on call and return model. Students, anything you want to ask about call and return architectures? Hello? Anything you want to ask about virtual machine based architectures, and in that particularly call and return architectures and rule based architectures? Hello?
No, sir.
Okay, shall we go ahead?
Yes, sir.
So by here we are ending software based architectural styles. By this concept you are ending software based architectural styles. Now the next is system architectural styles. As we know that under architectural styles for distributed systems, we have two things. One is the two types. First one is software based architectural style, and second one is system based architectural style. So now we finished learning software based architectural styles. Now we start with system architectural styles. System architectural styles mainly deals with physical organization of components and processes over a distributed infrastructure. That means here the infrastructure itself is distributed. That means like it is geographically distributed, and how to provide seamless access or communication between the various components. Here there are two fundamental reference styles. One is client server model and another one is peer-to-peer model. And already we know what is client server model. Students, tell me what is client server model? It's a very basic thing. Already we have discussed in our class.
Sir, client will request the server will respond to the client according to the request, sir.
Yes. Client will make a request in the form of a query. We call it as a query. It will send a request query. If that request is valid, then the server will reply, isn't it? Say for example, if it is asking for a particular resource, it will serve. If the query is a valid query, otherwise it will throw some error message or some reply. It will tell, okay, it will tell about unavailability of the service, or it will throw some error message. Now here the purpose of client is to make request, and the purpose of server is to serve the requests. The information and services of interest can be centralized and accessed through a single access point that is called the server. And here there can be one server and multiple clients. That is also possible. Then when I say server, since you have so many, say for example, let us assume, so there is a server which can cater, say for example, the capacity of server is it can cater to the needs of say some 1000 clients. Now what to do when the client size increases to 2000? So obviously you need to have another server, isn't it? Then you need to interconnect both the servers, and you need to deploy one load balancing server, okay, which will take a call on whether to redirect the request to server 1 or server 2. If the capacity of the server 1 is exceeded, it will redirect the request to server 2. Otherwise, it will serve from the server 1 itself. So such a model is called client server model. Then when it comes to client server model, there are so many variants. So I can show it in the form of a figure. You can see here. So this is a two-tier model. Students, you can see this diagram, isn't it? See here, if you consider the example of two-tier model, here there is no concept of database. Whatever the resources that are there that are directly stored in the server itself, in this server machine, client is making a request and it is checking whether the request is valid or not, and accordingly it is sending the response to the client. Then when we consider three-tier model, we have client here. So like this, there can be any number of clients. Here is the client. Client is making request to the server, and here like this, there can be one or more server. Then In turn, this server is connected to one more server, and that can be a database server also. That can be a file server, that can be a web server, that can be a database server, any server. So here the number of layers are 3. First layer is client, second layer is either it can be server com client, and the last layer is server. Similarly, we can have n-tier model also. So these are all the variants of client server model. So the popular models are 2-tier model and 3-tier model. Usually we use. Students, can you give one example for 3-tier model?
Google, sir.
How Google is example for 3-tier model?
Sir, it will check the nearest server in the client request. If it doesn't find in the next server, it will jump to the next server.
No. See, Google will be having so many servers. See, there is no restriction that you should request only for the web pages or something like that, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Do you think there is only one server for Google?
No, sir. N servers.
N server. Then what kind of model it is?
N server. Entire.
N-tier model. Yes. So for me, give me an example for 3-tier model. You have done projects and all, right? Say you have done one project in Java. Where do you deploy that? In Apache Tomcat, for example, or in Glassfish server, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Then let us assume you have created one database. Where you will store that?
Local, sir. No.
No, which database? There is database server, say Oracle server, MS SQL server. Now, see here, you have a client machine, and you have a, say for example, you are making a request for what? Web pages. So web pages, where it is stored? It is stored in the, it is hosted in, say for example, I have one dedicated server. Say for example, I have one dedicated server. I have hosted through 2-3 applications. One such application is yours. You have developed one Java application, and I have hosted, and mine is the web server. Now, my web server is connected to one database server. Then, for your application, you want database server also, and that is also connected to my web server, isn't it? Say, because when you open that HTML page, so that will be served from my server, and in turn that has to be connected to the database server so that you can fetch data, isn't it? So now you have client machine, you have web server, and you have database server. How many tier model it is? 3-tier model. Client machine, the server on which you have hosted the application, then database. We have 3 tiers. And another example for n-tier model. So in case of n-tier model, let us assume before the actual server, there is one proxy server. The role of this proxy server is to do pre-processing the requests. That means, say for example, hiding the actual IP address of the actual server, then doing encryption and decryption of the requests and the response, then redirecting then acting as interface between actual server and the client machines. Now in this case, so there is client, there is proxy server, there is actual server. Then that actual server is in turn connected with so many databases or so many other servers. Now this becomes example for n-tier model, which is a variant of client server architecture. Therefore, when I say web application, that is also client server. Then when I say like multiple client machines and one server, one single server, that is also simplest form of client server model, where the number of tiers are 2 tier. When I say web application, that is also variant of client server. Then when I say web services is an entire model, which is also an variant of client server model. That means we need to understand how the client server architecture is evolved over a period of time. First, people started with individual system, then they connected client and server. Then they came up with the concept of web programming, and that is web applications. Then they came up with the concept of entire models and web services. These are all the variants of, or these are all belonging to client server architecture models. Is it fine, students? Next is peer-to-peer architectural style. You can see here. So in case of peer-to-peer architecture, the architectures are symmetric. Symmetric architectures in which all the components called peers play the same role and incorporate both client and server capabilities of the client server model. That means when I say a peer-to-peer system, each system within the network is both client as well as a server. That means when it is availing the service, it becomes client. When it is servicing for another node, then it becomes server. That means each individual system is having the capability to act as both as a client as well as a server. That's the specialty about peer-to-peer system. Every node inside the peer-to-peer system can be a client as well as the server. More precisely, each peer acts as a server when it processes requests from other peers, and it acts as a client when it issues requests to other peers. So it's a cooperative networking model. Actually, peer-to-peer systems is a cooperative networking model where one node can help other node. During this course of time, if it is seeking the help, it becomes client. If it is helping the other node, it becomes server. Students, any doubt in this peer-to-peer model? Look at this diagram. See here, in the middle, we have a network. Then we have so many peers. See, peer means it can be a server also. It can be a desktop system. It can be any system, and where each system can act as a client as well as a server. And one more flexibility about this system is, say for example, say this is peer 1. It is having the autonomy to be part of the network or not. If it decides to disconnect from the network, it can disconnect. After some time, it wants to be part of this network, it can connect once again. So that's one of the features of P2P systems or peer-to-peer systems. Therefore, we have two architectural styles that are part of system architectural styles. One is client server model and peer-to-peer model. Students, look at here. If you get the question, you need to write the diagram also. Very important. Compulsorily, you have to write the diagrams. You may get the question like, explain in detail system architectural styles for distributed computing or distributed systems. Then we will see models for inter-process communication. Models for inter-process communication tells us about how to achieve inter-process communication within the context of distributed systems. Distributed systems are composed of a collection of concurrent processes. Concurrent processes means you need to understand the processes which are executing in concurrency. That means in parallel, interacting with each other by means of network connection. That means multiple processes are interacting with each other using the network infrastructure. IPC is a fundamental aspect of distributed systems design and implementation. The IPC means inter-process communication, which is a fundamental aspect of distributed system design and implementation. IPC is used to either exchange data and information or coordinate the activity of the processes. See, sometimes to coordinate the activities between the processes also you need to send messages that using IPC, and to exchange data also, data and information also you need to achieve communication. For that purpose, these are the two purposes for which we use IPC. IPC is what ties together different components of a distributed system. That means it is a like linkage or it's a medium using which the different components will communicate with each other within the distributed system or within the distributed environment, thus making them act as a single system. Even though systems are geographically at different places, you're using IPC to achieve communication so that the whole thing will look like a single system, single coherent system. There are several different models in which processes can interact with each other. These maps to the different abstractions of IPC, which you will see in the coming slides in detail. Among the most relevant that we can mention are shared memory concept. So already we have studied what is shared memory, where you have so many processors and one single memory which is shared between all the processors, and remote procedure call and message passing. So this is what we are going to study in the coming slides. At lower level, IPC is realized through the fundamental tools of networking programming. That means to achieve IPC, we need to deal with fundamental tools of network programming. Now we'll see what is message-based communication. First of all, that name itself is self-explanatory. Message-based communication. That means if you want to communicate or if you want to facilitate communication between one component with another component, you have to pass messages. So that's the thing this the title itself is telling us. The abstraction of message has played an important role in the evolution of the model and technologies enabling distributed computing. The definition of distributed computing is the one in which components located at networked computers, this is important, components located at networked computers communicate and coordinate their actions only by passing messages. That means when you have systems located at various places and they are connected through network infrastructure, and if they want to achieve communication, they have to pass messages. The term messages in this case identifies any discrete amount of information that is passed. So discrete means not continuous, whenever required. Discrete means passing the messages only whenever required. That is called discrete. Discrete amount of information that is passed from one entity to another. It encompasses any form of data representation that is limited in size and time. That means here the information is limited in size and time, whereas this is an invocation of a remote procedure or serialized object instance or a generic message. Students, remote procedure, how to implement remote procedures? As I told in Java J2EE, there is a concept called as RMI, remote procedure, remote method invocation. So that is a framework which will tell how to achieve remote method invocation. That is nothing but implementation of RPC. And there is one more concept called as serialization and deserialization. Students, tell me in Java, which is the class that supports for object serialization? Which is the interface? Students, you all have learned Java, isn't it? Tell me which is the interface in Java that supports for serialization of objects. Anyone? This is the interview question, students.
Sir, java.io.
Huh?
Java.io.
No. Interface I'm asking. Name of the interface. Students, there is a interface called serializable. The name of the interface is serializable, and it is a marker interface. You need to understand the meaning of marker interface. See, usually when you say an interface, it contains subclasses, isn't it? But a marker interface is one which doesn't contain any subclasses. Directly it supports for methods. It contains only methods. Then, say for example, if you want to send one object from one system to another system, that means there is an object in your local system and you have another node which is geographically present in some other place, and both the systems are connected through a network. Now you want to send one object from your system to another system. Now you have to serialize. You have to do serialization. That means for that purpose, you have to take a file. You have to put that object inside the file. So that means you will take file input stream. Then you will do the serialization. Then when you do serialization, it will be encrypted. Then at the receiving end, there is one more interface called as there you have to do something called as deserialization. To do deserialization, you will use file output class. That means to read what is the message sent by another machine. Say that means from one system you are sending message to another system. At the receiving end, they have to do deserialization. When you do deserialization, that will be decrypted. Then you want to read what is there inside in that file. So for that purpose, there you use file output stream. So that means here we use file input stream and file output stream, and we are going to send object by using that file input stream and file output stream, and the supported interface is serializable. Then the term message based communication model can be used to refer to any model for IPC. That means message based communication, that is nothing but the representation of inter-process communication. Now let us see what is remote procedure call. This paradigm extends the concept of procedure call beyond the boundaries of single process, thus triggering the execution of code in remote processes. That means you can send the message from one system to a remote system, so that you can invoke the method which is present in the remote machine. So hence it got its name, remote procedure call. That means invoking the method which is present in the remote machine. That's the concept. Then distributed objects. So when you have a distributed software system, the components are distributed. When I say the components are distributed, then obviously the objects are also distributed. This is an implementation of remote procedure call model for the object-oriented paradigm and contextualizes this feature for remote invocation of methods exposed by objects. That means what is the whole purpose of this distributed objects means invoking, say if you want to do some task, but the software itself is distributed. That means you have to call some procedure or a method which is there in some other system. Then you have to send a remote procedure call to that machine so that it can invoke an appropriate method or a function. Examples for distributed object infrastructures are CORBA. Students, you know, right? What is CORBA? Hello? You all have studied web programming, isn't it, students? What is CORBA and COM and DCOM? In web programming, you have studied COM, DCOM, and CORBA. Tell me what is CORBA? Anyone?
Sir, CORBA is a software bus, sir.
CORBA is a software
Bus.
Huh?
Bus, sir. Software bus, sir.
No, it's not a software bus. See, Corba will give you the specification about how to achieve distributed object communication. And it's a model. Corba itself is a model for, see, look at the expansion of Corba, common object request broker architecture. What is that broker architecture? So that broker architecture is facilitating the communication between remote objects. That means it is a standard or the specification or the guide. You can consider it as a specification, guidelines, or the standard using which the remote objects can communicate each other. Then component object model, COM. See, in web programming, we say COM address. What is that COM address? So what is COM and DCOM? See, COM means component object model and DCOM means distributed component object model. See, COM model is used within the context of a single machine. If the application is distributed, then we consider DCOM, that is distributed component object model. Similarly, another example is Java remote method invocation. So which is a framework which will tell how to achieve, how to invoke remote methods by using Java framework. And similarly in .NET there is a concept called as .NET remoting. Students, through this we learn, the takeaway from this is that, see, if you want to achieve distributed object communication, so there are certain models that you need to study, that is Corba model and DCOM model. These two are the popular model, DCOM and Corba. What are these? These are the architectures which will tell how to achieve communication within the context of distributed objects or distributed applications. Then distributed agents and active objects. Let us see what are distributed agents and active objects. Programming paradigms based on agents and active objects involve by definition the presence of instances. That means, students, here we need to understand what is the meaning of agent. Say when I say software agent, what does it mean? Students, when I say software agent, what does it mean? Students, now listen carefully. I'll tell two different scenarios. Say for example, scenario 1, I want to book the ticket for a movie. What I'll do, I'll go to some portal, say Book My Show. I'll manually go to that Book My Show. I'll check the particular movie name and I'll check the show timings, and I will only manually book the ticket by using my credit card. That is scenario 1. And scenario 2, I'll write an application or a program which on my behalf will open the portal Book My Show, then it will only check the movie and the movie timings and book the ticket. So in scenario 1, it is me who is manually doing all the work, all my work I am only doing. And in the scenario 2, a software agent is doing. So now what is that software agent? The program what I have written. Isn't it? I may be using some object within the program to do my task. So that is called software agent. Okay. Now when your system is distributed, we call such agents as software agents. Isn't it? When the system is distributed, we call them as distributed agents. Then what are active objects? Students, in C++, there is a concept of destructors. So what is the purpose of a destructor? Tell me.
To destroy an object sir will use.
To destroy the objects that are created, isn't it? So that memory can be freed and objects will die. So if they do not die, what happens? Until they die, they were alive. That means they were active. So that is called active objects. Okay, so the objects which are alive and functioning, that means simply if I want to say, like if you have certain objects which are designated to do some task, and they are active, so we call them as active objects. Okay, now carefully read that definition. You will understand. Programming paradigms based on agents and active objects involve, by definition, the presence of instances. Instances means nothing but the object. Instance of a class or an object, whether they are agents of objects despite the existence of requests. Okay, so if an object is doing some task on your behalf, we call it as an agent, and if it is active, we call it as an active object. That's it. Then web service. So web services, I need not tell anything. So already we have discussed. So web services are meant for providing certain specific services to a large number of clients, and it's a variant of client server model. Now look at here, some more information is been added in this slide. An implementation of RPC concept or HTTP. That means, see here the web services are distributed in nature. They are distributed in nature. Hence, the communication happens to RPC concept over HTTP. That means it will use it to achieve RPC also, it will make use of HTTP protocol. That's the meaning. Thus allowing the interaction of components that are developed with different technologies. That means, when I say web service, it is facilitating for the interaction of components which are developed with different technologies. That means, say one component may be developed by using Java, another may be using .NET, but still you are able to communicate with each other. Just like how a banking application may communicate with Visa or MasterCard. Okay, where if I consider Visa is implemented using .NET and the banking application is implemented using Java. Okay, that's the example. A web service is exposed as a remote object hosted on a web server, and method invocation are transformed in HTTP requests using specific protocols such as SOAP and REST. Students, so SOAP and REST are very important protocols within the context of web services. Those are the two protocols which are very highly which are in demand. So now the current trend is REST, that is representational state transfer. It is also called as representational state transfer, which is nothing but an alternative for SOAP protocol. We'll stop it here. We'll continue from the next class.